hosting Clemson is probably too many points. I think Texas wins this game, but Clemson can give Texas some trouble. They really haven't faced a passing attack like Clemson has this season with Cade Klubnik. They can pass, and also when they have success in the passing game, that's when Clemson tends to win games. If you can slow down Cade Klubnik, who's very good at throwing on the run, then you can slow down Clemson. And what is also fascinating is that Cade Klubnik went to school in Austin. He graduated from Austin Westlake. In fact, I believe, if I have this correct, Klubnik and Austin Westlake beat Quinn Ewers and South Lake Carroll for a state championship a few years ago, like in 2021, I think. So this is going to be a rematch of two guys who went up against each other for a state title, and it's going to be a bit of a homecoming for Klubnik, so I think there's going to be a lot of motivation there. And certainly when we talk about Dabo Swinney, this is a guy who knows how to coach championship football. He's been there. He's won titles. I think Texas wins this game, but 10.5, even with the extra prep, even with the game in Austin, seems like just a little bit too big of a number for me.
I think if we're casting like a wide net here, I think when in doubt, you take the points here. Because think about these games. Like, style points no longer matter in these. It is simply survive and advance. So do you think some of these teams are going to run up the score and like put more, plays on the film for the other teams? No, they're simply trying to win and get to the next round of this. So I think you look at some of these. Do you think there's blowout potential in any of these games? Like, the only team that, SMU looked really bad in the first half against Clemson, but they did show fight in the second half. And they also have extra time to prepare. Penn State coming off a really tight game with Oregon, but obviously, there's some time off in between. And then Indiana has not played a ton of tough opponents. So which game has more blowout potential? Is it Notre Dame, Indiana? Or is it Penn State, SMU? Or, pick another game. I just feel like those two are kind of the obvious ones where it looks like the opponent could be a little outmatched.
Yeah, and you know what I wonder too, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because when you just look at these matchups, like you just glance at them, and you see a traditional football power in Notre Dame taking on Indiana, which historically is the worst team in college football. Seriously, if you go back and look at the records, Indiana is never good at football. So you're not accustomed to seeing Indiana in a college football playoff. And then you look at Penn State, another traditional power, taking on SMU, a team that just got to the ACC from the AAC, a team that hasn't been relevant on a regular basis at the national level since the Pony Express in the 1980s. So what I think is that we're giving a little too much credit to a Notre Dame and to a Penn State because of the name, right? There's a gravitas there that you don't get with an Indiana or an SMU. But Indiana can play, and so can SMU. And I think both of these offenses are good enough to keep it within the number. Now, I need to do more of my research here and really dig into it, because right now we're just sort of throwing out initial thoughts and talking through it. But when you're talking about a playoff and giving everything you've got to advance, this is when trick plays come in, when formations, when schemes you haven't seen before are implemented in games like this, because it's win or go home. And so that's why Georgia and Texas is a perfect example. Georgia caught Texas off guard with a fake punt that nobody thought was coming. It extended a drive. It ended up being one of the differences in that game. Little plays like that end up being huge differentiators. And so because there's so much on the line, I don't think I feel comfortable laying 8.5 points in these opening round games. I think Indiana is better than we expect, and so is SMU.
I think that the conversation for so long throughout the course of the college football season has been how much parity we have at the top this year. Like, it feels like there's nobody who's like the cream of the crop with the exception of maybe Oregon. So if you take that to the bank, Jenks, do you think you could automatically just blind bet every single underdog in the first round and come out with a profit? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, even if you don't win all of them, do you think most of the dogs cover? Like, I tend to kind of lean that direction.
Yeah, I think if I'm just blind betting and saying, okay, choose the favorites or choose the dogs, I'm taking the dogs. There's just too much at stake. And also, these are big numbers. I think that's the thing, too. It's not just, okay, the underdogs will have a chance here. It's the number. The Irish are favored by 8.5. Penn State is favored by 8.5. Texas is favored by 10.5. The Buckeyes are favored by 7. So you're getting a touchdown or more with each and every single favorite. I understand they're playing at home. I understand, in theory, they're the better teams, or they've proven to be the better teams this season. But yeah, on the whole, I would take a hard look at the dogs because, again, in a tournament, it's different. It's similar to March Madness. It's not the same, but in some ways it is, right? Where, and these aren't these first-round matchups where it's a number 1 seed taking on a 16 seed, right? Like, the difference here in football is much closer. So yeah, I would take a hard look at the Bulldogs here, or not the Bulldogs, or the underdogs here before you place your money, unless you have a really strong feeling early on.
Go Dogs! I
Go
thought you were going
Dogs!
to say that and start barking like the Georgia fans.
No.
Here's the other X factor that I think maybe lends itself to some of these games. When we talk about bowl games or any game that has a long layoff, I feel like coaching matters a lot. When you give a good coach more time to prepare, I think it lends itself to that team. Do any of the coaches kind of fit the bill here? Like, obviously, let's start with Texas. Sark is an offensive guy that's going to have something prepared, but does that cancel out with the fact that sometimes we don't have the most confidence in Quinn Ewers? Yeah. Is there any angle you see here with the coaching?
I think Sark's going to be fine. I think Dabo has a bit of an advantage because he has that championship pedigree. Now, Sark has been there with Alabama as an assistant. And also, I will say, when it comes to, Quinn, I know there's a lot of people out there that want to see Arch Manning, and Arch is going to be great. But let's also remember that Quinn Ewers is responsible for, overall, in his 2 years as a starter, few games he hasn't started, Texas has won 22 games in 2 years. So I understand he didn't look great against Georgia, but not all quarterbacks look great against Georgia. It's still Georgia. So it's easy to say, oh, you're not getting the quarterback play you want. Let's put in Arch. Yes, maybe Arch has better tools than Quinn. I would argue that he does. But also inserting a guy who hasn't been your starter all year into that situation, if it works fantastically. You look like a genius. If it doesn't, and you take out your entrenched starter, and for some reason Arch doesn't perform well, you look like a moron. So you got to roll with Quinn Ewers here. And ultimately, Quinn Ewers has been very good against teams not named Georgia, and there's no guarantee that Texas will face Georgia again in this playoff. So I don't like the idea of starting Arch. I like the idea of implementing him in certain spots, but I'm not of the opinion that he should be benched at all. And Sark will be fine. The Texas offense is generally fine when they're not playing Georgia, but Georgia and Kirby Smart, that's a different animal.